Welcome to Closer Look, a podcast where our pastoral team at Charis City Church takes a deeper dive into the topics we're exploring together as a church. Join us as we unpack the truths of Scripture and consider how to apply them to our everyday lives. For more resources and information, visit us at chariscity.com. Welcome to Week 5 of Charis City's podcast called Closer Look, where each week we'll be diving deeper into Sunday's sermon. I'm your host, Adam Morgan, and I serve as our Creative and Connections pastor here. I'm joined by our lead pastor, Nathan Reimer, our associate pastor, Chris Hallback, and, as a special guest today, our director of operations, Lil Reimer. Lil, we're super excited that you've joined us. I know this might be a little out of your comfort zone, but we're glad you're here.
Just a little.
I'm just saying she's definitely the best looking one of us.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Very, very true.
Was that really a contest?
It is not. I'm second, by the way.
So this Sunday, we continued our series, Dangerous Prayers, where we're looking at 3 different prayers that can change our lives and take us to places we've never expected. In this week's prayer, Heal Me, you guys explained that this prayer is probably one of the most universal and instinctive prayers we pray, but it can become truly transformative when we do so with desperation, faith, and submission. Nathan, the sermon started out with these guys breaking through a roof to get their friend to Jesus. What does that kind of desperate faith really look like in our modern world?
Well, I think we have this tendency, as I talked about, to not really feel the need to rely on Jesus day in and day out. You know, we talked about give us this day our daily bread. That's not something that we really do. I mean, we have plenty of food to last weeks. And so I think there is a real tendency for us not to have that kind of desperation. And even when we're praying for healing, unless we pray it the right way, I don't think it's a danger. If it is just God, give me what I want in the way that I want it, it's really not dangerous. It's asking for something. But it becomes a dangerous prayer when you go and do something different. And that's kind of what these guys were doing. I mean, the obvious thing for them to have done would have been to carry the mat to the front door, wait till Jesus is done talking. Because, I mean, this is an amazing teacher, and they're just going to interrupt him, and they're going to destroy someone else's roof that has to be repaired. And I'm sure that was their next job after they were done, is repairing the roof that they tore apart. But there was a desperate move, and that desperate move was getting to Jesus. And for us, it is less physical, right? I mean, Jesus is not in a house where we go find him, but he is waiting on us to have that kind of desperation. He is drawn to desperation. And so I think that's just the example of what are the lengths that you'll go to have that kind of a connection with Jesus. Will you, philosophically or theoretically, however you want to say it, will you tear up the roof to get to Jesus? And what does that look like? I mean, to me, that's, will you tear up your relationships that are not God honoring? Will you tear up your addictions that are not God honoring? What are your attitudes about healing or whatever else? Will you be desperate? And that's kind of the way I feel about what those guys did, was that desperation.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't think we see physical tearing of roofs off, for people to get to Jesus, but I think you see that level of desperation when someone's on their deathbed and people are praying over them. I know people that have prayed that desperately when they've tried for a year and a half to have a kid. I think that desperation is getting to the place where we recognize, like, there's nothing we can do about this. God, it is you and you alone. However you do it, do it.
Yeah, tear up the roof. That'd be a good sermon series title.
It would.
I mean, I think we ought to think about that. I kind of like the, tear up the roof and just these ideas of, and again, going back to physical healing, I think you tear up the roof when you get to Jesus in the sense of your willingness to be healed, not just in the way you think you should be healed,
whatever comes,
but whatever God thinks is best for you and whatever that looks like.
Yeah. I mean, I really loved your illustration. I'm just going to bring it up now because it was hilarious, of seeing, Chris come swinging through the sanctuary on the trapeze. I'm still waiting for when is that going to happen? Is that going to be what tears up the roof?
I'm done. That is my last day here at Charis City Church.
Might be my last day.
Yeah, one of us is going.
Well, that's my last day, at Charis City, or my last day on earth, depending on how that trapeze holds
that's
up.
Right, yeah.
Talk about a dangerous prayer. So, how do you think people would react to seeing that level of desperation, though, displayed today? Not that
talking
level.
about-
Sorry.
Chris
Yeah.
coming down. That
No,
level
and
of desperation would
the
be
level
yeah.
of desperation of being willing to tear up the roof to get to Jesus.
I think that there are impediments to us today having that level of desperation. I mean, I think one is obviously give us this day our daily bread is not realistic for us in America. There are other places where it is. But I think modern medicine is an impediment to that kind of desperation. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't have it. I'm glad and very thankful to God that we have modern medicine. But I hear stories from missionaries in more third world country places where they don't have modern medicine, where they see miracle healing way more often than we do. And I think to a certain extent, we don't have that need, and God understands it because we have replaced that to a certain extent with medicine. And because they don't, like I said, I've heard stories of in the depths of India and Africa and places like that where they will just see people healed of significant disease and disorders more often than we do. We do see that, but I think not as often. But I think we get this suburban 3-car garage kind of attitude. And so we go to church on Sunday and we go back to our regular life. And then we want to see God move in our life. And that's not realistic because we don't have we're not seeking out God. And then we wonder why he's not moving in our marriage, moving in our family. And so I think that convenience, I guess, is I've kind of worked my way around to the one word answer that I think I would say is convenience. I think convenience and comfort are real impediments to a desperate relationship with God that's based on your lack of ability to do it yourself.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we live in a culture that praises self-reliance. It's all about you're a self-motivator, you're a self-starter, you're a business owner, and so everything in your life becomes, I have the ability to do it. And I think that's the difference with desperation is the recognition that you don't. The recognition that there are things in our life that God has given us the ability and authority to work out and do on our own. Like we talked about that last week. I know our jobs most of the time, that's something that we do. But when it comes to our spiritual walk or instances of supernatural healing, whether that's physical or not, I think those are those moments where we have to recognize that comes by God alone, and it's not one of those things that if we just had enough faith, it'll happen the way we want it. No, it happens the way that God does it, and I think we have to come to that recognition. But I think people would be shocked to see that level of desperation sometimes, at least in America, and I do. I think it's because we don't really have a need for it that often outside of those dramatic
need. I want to be we absolutely have that need,
right?
We just don't have an awareness
well
of it.
I mean in the physical healing, I mean there really is, there's so much that we take for granted, the marvel that is things like modern medicine and what Tylenol does nowadays. I mean, there was a point where fever pretty much was a death sentence, and now you take a little pill that you picked up at HEB and you're done, you're good. But what's crazy about that is that in and of itself, whether they realize it or not, was an answer to someone's desperate prayer at some point. And God answered it a certain way, and we reap the benefits of that now. But I think about that desperation, even in church leadership and what it would change for people to see church leaders, I don't want to say lose confidence, but maybe lose some confidence in ourselves and put that dependence back on God to change things. I know, that was something we talked about as a staff probably 6 or 7 months ago now, maybe a little longer, trying to get back to that idea of desperation to see God move, and that it's less reliance on us and more reliance on him. And I think in all areas of life, if we get to that, I think, that God will take you to some really special places.
I think another one is a lack of patience keeps us from seeing God move the way we want him to, because we have this attitude of we want it now just the way we want it. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think about just like fast food. Fast food now isn't good enough. Drive-up windows are now too slow. So now we have apps, so we can order it before we even get there. We don't have to wait till we get there.
I don't go to drive-thrus.
Yeah, no, because it takes
I'm
too
at the
long.
counter. I've ordered it. I pull up, hand me my food when I get there.
Yeah, because I mean, when you go, my goodness, think about the process of ordering at the window of a fast food restaurant. You got to order one place. Then you got to put it back in drive and move up 15 feet. You got to get to another place. You got to pay. And sometimes you got to go to a third place and then pick up your food. And that's too much for us. So now we want an app so it's already paid for and somebody brings us out our food and we're done. And I think that lack of patience of waiting on God, praying desperately for God to move, but then waiting to see what God does. And I think that's another impediment to it.
Yeah. Well, and some of it's, the patience beforehand, because you gotta add in the time for them to get the meal wrong, and then to get the meal again a second time with the correction. Looking at you, McDonald's. So we're talking a lot about this idea of physical healing, and I know Lil, you mentioned that your struggle with lupus for the last I think you said 15, 16 years. You mentioned that you don't pray for physical healing from lupus anymore. Can you kind of walk us through how you came to that place?
Well, I'm not sure that it was like an overnight thing. I think it was just step after step, day after day, getting up and relinquishing that control. And I think that's another thing that keeps us from being that desperate now is we all want to be in control. I want to be in control of my life, and I want to, everything that you see and hear, even on TV now, is about you being in control of you. And it doesn't matter what everybody else is doing in the world. So I think it was just relinquishing that control day after day of there is no cure for lupus. So you're kind of already at a disadvantage there. And now we just try things. We just try things to see what makes you feel better, what doesn't make you feel better, and when you're dealing with all those symptoms, and it was a long road to the diagnosis in the first place. So, I was already at a point of, God, what are you trying to show me here? Because it took so long to get an actual concrete diagnosis for autoimmune diseases. So I think it was really just a gradual, and it just became easier and easier to get up and relinquish that control day after day.
How did that change your relationship with God or even your view of God?
Well, it definitely makes you more dependent on God, and it makes you more apt to, first thing when you get up in the morning, when you don't feel like getting up in the morning, or it hurts to get up in the morning, or whatever that is, I think then, you're more apt to, all right, before I even get out of this bed, it's not my cell phone in my hand. It's not scrolling to see what's happening on Facebook or whatever it is. It's okay. I've got to start in the right framework, right frame of mind for this. So starting with that prayer in the morning of, I need some help here. I've got a lot to accomplish today. And when I was first diagnosed, our kids were much younger. So it was battling 4 young kids as well as everything else you need to accomplish in the day. So, it definitely improved, I would say, my relationship with God on a deeper level, just having that dependence on Him day after day.
What's funny is the first time, I say the first time, it might not have been the first time, a time I preached and told the story about your lupus and that I don't pray very often anymore for you to be physically healed. Somebody came up to me after the sermon and said, do you think that's right? Shouldn't you always know that God can heal and keep praying for that? And I said, no, I don't think so. I think about what the Apostle Paul did with his thorn in the flesh. He says, 3 times I asked God to take it away, and God said, my grace is sufficient for you. It's not like God doesn't know we would like her lupus to go away. And I think that's where we miss on that, is we have appealed to God. We have asked God in desperation to take that physical sickness away, and to this point, He hasn't done it. I don't think God is now lost on that, right? He's not sitting up there going, I wonder if they would still like the lupus to go away. He knows, but it is a submission to His will and an awareness that if God decides in His will to take it away, He knows we're going to be okay with that. And I really think that's the right approach to that. That doesn't mean it's wrong to keep praying for physical healing for a child. Obviously we are still desperately praying for our child that's struggling. But I think there comes a point, particularly with yourself, where you go, God, this is yours, and I trust you in that moment. And that seems pretty biblical to me when you read Paul's approach to that same thing, whatever that physical disability was that he had.
Yeah. Well, because he says I prayed 3 times and then I let it go, and I think that's where you get.
Well, I think sometimes we think that God can only display his glory through the physical,
Right.
and neglect the entire other side of it, that God uses it. I mean, y'all talk on Sunday about all the good that's come out of it, despite how horrible it is. And I think, Paul, I would say the same thing. For Paul, imagine the pride you would have getting to see heaven and being who you are. I mean, you are clearly at that point an authoritative person in the church, and not just a local church, but all of it, and knowing that the element that Paul went through, whatever it was, brought a humility to Paul and a complete dependence on God. There was never a point where Paul got to look at God and go, I got this without you, and I think what's really, I'll say cool, about your story and other stories I know like it, is you go to the place from, God heal this to God use this. And I think in those moments where we accept that God may be doing something different through it, I mean, he will use it in incredible ways. I mean, I think that's absolutely biblical. Does God always take away the suffering? No. But does God use it? Yes.
I think about something that happened very recently where someone was talking to me about losing a child, having a child die. And I think I have a different level of empathy and wisdom to counsel in that area. I haven't lost a child, but I've nearly lost a child, and there's still that unknown of what's going to happen going forward with our child. And I really do think it has made me a better pastor because I have a wisdom about what that must feel like, and rather than having to guess, I have a sense of that at this point. And so that's a good that I see has come out of it.
Yeah. Something that I love that you guys hit on in your sermon on Sunday was that it's not that you have lost hope in God's ability to heal. It's that you 100% believe that God has the ability to heal, but you know that may not be his perfect will in this. That may not be the plan that he has for this. And I just love that you guys keep talking about that you still have this hope of healing, but you still see the healing take place in other ways, in your family, in your marriage, how y'all have seen him move in that. And so on that, so to someone who might see this side of praying for healing and think that this idea is more so giving up hope, what would you say to someone who might have that view, that looking at it this way is more giving up hope?
Well, I think it's really just the opposite. It's really not giving up hope. It's a transformation of what hope looks like. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that it's you're now looking that hope that healing goes beyond not just the physical healing, but the emotional, the spiritual, all the way to our eternity for that. And we haven't resigned ourselves to just sit in a corner and be ill and not do anything. I mean, we're actively serving other people. We planted this church. Our marriage has grown. Just our relationship with our family, our children. The list just goes on and on and on of the things that.
Yeah, I was going to say we wouldn't be sitting here most likely.
Yeah, that's what I was
with
going to say.
You guys,
know y'all,
if it weren't for lupus. I really believe that we would not be here if it weren't for lupus.
Right.
Sorry, I interrupted.
No, that's okay. But I think that's accurate. I think that's, I think it's just the opposite. It's actually about taking what your perspective of hope is and transforming it to something else. And
I think it's also transforming your understanding of healing.
Yeah.
I think we get this locked in idea of the definition of healing. And God clearly has a different understanding of healing than we do. And the story that we talked about on Sunday, that's that story. So this guy shows up, he's a paraplegic. He wants to walk again. That's why he's there. And what's the first thing Jesus says? Your sins are forgiven. Yep. He was way more interested in healing this guy spiritually by forgiving his sins than he was seeing this man get up and walk again. And I really do question whether or not Jesus would have healed this man had the Pharisees or whoever the religious leaders were that were there that day that were questioning his ability to forgive sin. I don't know that he wouldn't have healed, but I don't know that he would have. But the point is clear. God is way more worried about our inner healing than he is. And so I think that's part of faith is reimagining or re-understanding what healing is.
Yeah, I was going to say kind of the same thing. Was I think we elevate physical healing to a level that God never really intended it to be. I mean, it is absolutely in Scripture, especially in the New Testament. It's signs and wonders and proof of God's power, and that's great. I mean, Jesus says that. He's like, "You want to know if I have authority to forgive sins? Well, all right, get up."
Yeah.
And I think that comes from our obsession with the immediate. We think that everything God wants to do for us so often, and I think it's our flesh, is we think it's this life, right? We think God's got to fix this life, and it's like, and he can, and he does. I mean, in most instances, a relationship with God is going to radically change your life for the better. Will some circumstances get harder? Absolutely. But ultimately what he's concerned about is your eternity and what he does through you in this life by the end of it. And I think that's where we get it mixed up as we look at physical healing as like the ultimate end all be all.
Right.
And God goes, no, there's something way bigger I'm trying to do than that.
We want God to do something for us.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's really wanting to do something in us. I think about it this way, that unless Jesus returns, we are all going to die. And that's just the reality. And so whether we get healed from cancer at, I'm 56, hopefully I don't have cancer, but if I did and he heals me, 50 years from now, I'm going to be just as dead as I would have been if I hadn't have recovered from cancer.
Yeah.
And so unless Jesus returns, we're all going to die. And so I think from that perspective and the fact that God sees eternity, he sees what life is going to be like for us in 1,000 years and the joy and excitement and all of the things we're going to experience as his followers. And I don't think God has the level of concern about physical healing that we do.
Yeah.
And I get a little, I guess, discouraged at churches that over-focus on physical healing, because I think they've missed the point of what Jesus came to do. The end-all be-all of prayer, in fact, it's not even close to the most important thing of prayer, is not for us to be physically healed. God may do that, and he may do that as a gift. He may do it to show his power. He may do it for some specific purpose, but he may not. That doesn't change the character of who God is and his love for us. And so I just think we get a little over-focused on physical healing as individuals, and that makes sense. But even as churches, where we think that physical healing is the primary thing that God does in power. And I just don't think that's true. I think the primary thing he does in his power is transform lives and transform eternities.
Well, look at the Lord's Prayer. Healing's not in it.
Yeah.
In that, an interesting thing that Jesus said, this is the way you pray, and not once is that what comes up. You see God's will would be done. You see that God would provide. But the biggest portion of it is, forgive us our debts as we forgive those who are indebted against us. And I think that shows you where his priorities lie. Right? It is inward, not outward. And does he heal the outward sometimes? Yes, absolutely. But we know what his primary focus is.
Y'all talked a lot about Paul's thorn in the flesh and how he could heal others, but not himself specifically. What do you think this paradox tells us about God's purpose in suffering?
I think God does not cause suffering as a general rule, but God uses suffering and God allows suffering. And we have to just acknowledge that. He is God, and this is the process by which this life works.
Yep.
And I think beauty comes out of suffering. I think about your suffering and the way we've gone through this and all the things we've already talked about that came out of that suffering. I think we have a much more joyful marriage because of lupus. I think I have a better relationship for sure with our kids than I would have with lupus. And I am certainly a more thoughtful and empathetic person because of lupus. And so I think God uses that and brings beauty out of that difficulty to accomplish his purpose.
So with that idea of suffering, how do you explain that to someone who's praying desperately for physical healing and explain to them that idea of God's purpose in suffering?
I would say keep praying. Don't give up. I mean, until you find that alignment with God's will. And I think that's really, if you were going to define what has happened to you and really to me with her lupus is we pray less for physical healing because we have an alignment with God's will. And I think that's a big part of what prayer does. Prayer does get answered. I mean, I firmly believe that prayer changes things in our world. Yeah. Now, the weirdness, and I guess we can go deep here for just a second. God knew a billion years you were going to pray right here and that he was going to answer your prayer. Yes, but that's because he's God. And that kind of weirds the mind out when you think about what does that look like to pray for God to change his mind. And he already knew a million years ago that he was going to do exactly what he was going to do because you were going to pray in that moment. So that is one thing. I believe prayer is powerful and prayer changes things. Yeah. But I also believe that prayer aligns our will with God's. And the more we pray with faith of God, heal me, but in your way. Does that make sense? And I think you're the living example of that is heal me in my way to heal me in your way. Yeah. And heal us in your way. And I think that's a big part of what prayer does for us is an alignment of our will with God's.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Lil, I love the way you said it on Sunday, stand firm in what he can do, right? Believe that he has the ability, but submit to what he does. And understand that comes from a perfect and good plan and will. Right. And I think that does make a huge difference.
Yeah. And I think something else it does, especially, I think it helps bridge the gap between Christian and non-Christian, because regardless of where you are in your faith journey, I guarantee you've either walked in or walking through or going to walk through suffering at some point. So I think it helps us as believers be empathetic to things that happen to different people in our lives or different family members or what have you. It kind of allows us a bridge that allows us to kind of, have this relationship building thing. It allows us to help counsel. It allows us to help show where our hope comes from in those things. Because if your hope comes from something of this world, suffering is awful. And I don't know. I don't know how other people can walk through it is the way that we can with the hope of our salvation and our eternity. And it's easier to explain that on the other side of suffering. Usually it's easier to understand it when you're on the other side of suffering. But it does still allow us to have that bridge that, helps bridge the gap between different lives and different walks of life for people. So on this idea, what do you think the difference is between accepting pain and being defeated by it?
It's stepping outside yourself, which is a hard thing to do. There are points that I have been defeated by pain over and over again. But there are also points where, by starting out in that with prayer and being able to say, okay, I can't do this on my own, God actually does give me the strength. He does. And I'm not going to say that I wasn't still in pain because I was. But, once you can get yourself focused on something else, it becomes a lot easier for me anyway to deal with pain. Say it's coming to church, whatever it is, and setting up and doing all the things. Nothing about setting up for church on Sunday morning is conducive to pain relief. You're hauling stuff, you're setting stuff up. There is nothing about that.
How many steps do you walk on the average Sunday?
Somewhere between 15 and 17,000 steps. So on the average Sunday.
That's good for pain relief.
But if you can, distraction is great for the mind. And by starting with prayer, that's the first thing that, kind of takes that to a different level. And then from there, when I set my sights to, okay, we have a mission to carry out today. That's why I think serving is so important, is because the more you can focus on somebody else and what they need, it really does help to mitigate what you need in that moment. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't go home and collapse at points afterwards, but it does help to to, I guess, distract the mind. The mind is an amazing thing, but it does help to distract the mind, when you can place your focus somewhere else rather than on woe is me today. And I've been there. I've focused on woe is me today, and it does not help. It does not help pain. I mean, as anybody, no matter what, even just in an injury and stuff, when you're focused on all you have to do right now is sit here and think about the fact that I have this injury and this pain is here, but if you can, pull yourself out of that, and focus on something else, it does help to, it doesn't take the pain away, but it does help to distract the mind from the pain.
If you played sports, you know exactly what she's talking about. I can't tell you how many times playing football or baseball or something, particularly football because it's so active, but I'd sprain an ankle and I'd come off and stand a few minutes, walk it off, get back out there and go play the rest of the game, and it wouldn't hurt. But when the game is over and you're not distracted by the football game, man, it hurts. And then you start having to ice it down and it swells, but you don't even realize, or you have some big cut on your arm, or, and you don't even realize it's there until, things settle down and you're no longer distracted by what's going on. Then you're like, man, that really hurts, and I think that the mind does that for you.
Well, and I think there's something to say about fighting through it. I think one of the things that I've known you for 3.5 years now almost. And one of the things that I appreciate about you is I know you have days where like it is debilitating. I can think about moments where I've called you before and you've been like, I'm literally just sitting here because my head hurts so bad. But I think one of the things that's important with stuff like this is like there will be days where you get knocked down, but you got to get back up and keep going. Talking about sports. I remember my sophomore year of high school, first game of the year in football, I got a grade 3 sprain to the point that I was supposed to walk on crutches for like 3 weeks. And I knew, so this will tell you how bad we were. I knew that the next game of the season was the only game we were going to win all year. And so I was bound and determined. That was a big deal. And so I was like, I'm not missing this game. Like, there's no way, and the trainer sitting there, Brittany was like, you're not playing. Like, there's no way. And I was like, just ice it. I'll put my foot in here for an hour and a half, whatever I got to do. And, I remember game day, we taped it up so tight, I could not feel it. And it couldn't even, it wouldn't even bend. It was just, I had a 90-degry angle that was what I played with for every game. But, I fought through that pain. And like you said, by the end of it, about an hour and a half after the game, done. Absolutely done, but it was worth every bit of it in that moment. And I think the same thing is true, with suffering. We're going to have days where we get knocked down. We are human. We are finite. We are weak. But I think how we choose to respond to that says a lot about whether that thing is winning the battle or winning the war.
Yeah. And the reality is hardship and suffering delivers some wins for the kingdom. And we miss that. Yeah. I'll never forget one time when I was at my past ministry, it was during the week, and two sisters had come into the church and they wanted to talk to a pastor. And they were very upset. Their younger brother had been diagnosed with very serious cancer, and they were angry at God. They were upset, and they began talking about their history and began telling me they haven't been in a church since they were like 7. And, their parents didn't really go. They don't care anything about it, and they don't understand what God is doing in this moment. And I prayed with them. I shared the gospel with them, and I thought, I know what God is doing in this moment, at least one thing he's doing in this moment. It brought you back to church, and it brought you to a situation where you heard about the gospel. And sometimes God uses suffering for that. I think about North Carolina. We had the video on Sunday of the church we're partnering with in North Carolina to provide help. It lets the church be the church and help people in their physical needs. But really, that's not the primary thing God's worried about. He wants to rally people to the church so that they're rallied to him and they meet him. And that's the bigger issue. I think suffering does that. That's a good that comes from suffering that helps the kingdom and furthers God's plan and purpose.
Yeah, I feel like I don't remember if I've talked about this in here just with you guys, but one of my mentors in high school, Paul, he and his wife had a baby that was stillborn, and they knew ahead of time it was going to happen, but they were so far along in the pregnancy, they were like, you have to deliver the baby. And one of the most impactful things about that was, and if you know Paul, you would know. I mean, like, the dude is probably the most on fire for Jesus person I've ever met in my life. He is a giant 5-year-old, and I love him. But in that moment, and this is, I mean, a horrible situation. What they did for the next hour was sing worship songs in the delivery room, and of course, brought everyone in that hospital to tears, just moved by it, and it was an opportunity that they used to glorify God in the midst of that suffering. And, I can't help but think about the lives that were impacted and probably eternities changed because of something like that in that moment, And so when we choose to use suffering, and I think that's a big key of it to me too, is God will use it, but we can choose how we respond to it and use it. And I think when we use those moments to glorify God and let God use us, I think it makes a monumental difference in the lives of the people around us.
And I think God is glorified. I think God is so pleased with us when we choose to truly submit to his will in difficult circumstances. I think it's easy to go, God, you're awesome when everything's going well and great. But to say, God, you're awesome when everything is falling apart, I think God is glorified by that. And I think he is pleased with us as his children when we worship him in those moments.
You guys opened up about having a child with health struggles. How do you reconcile both being a pastor who prays for others, healing, and a parent watching your child suffer?
Like I said earlier, I think I have a different level of empathy when I pray for someone else or when I counsel with someone about that situation because of the situation with my child. But I think it's somewhat the same, but that's where I have to work for desperation for others when I pray, because I believe that when it says the prayers of a righteous person are powerful, when James says that, it's not just the prayers of a righteous person, it's the urgent, it's the desperate prayer of a righteous person. Yeah, that's right, exactly right. And it's a unique Greek word used for prayer there that is a different kind of, it's not just I hope things get better, praying for you, buddy. It is a desperate, urgency in prayer. And so when I pray for Ashley, I pray desperation because I feel that desperation. Mm-hmm. That comes naturally to me because I know the impact, I feel the impact. And so what I have to do as a pastor, and I try to do it better than I used to, I don't always do as well, is not just pray, but to try to understand and empathize when I pray for the desperation they feel. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Because I want to pray with that diasis. I want to pray in a way that fulfills my obligation as their pastor to come before God. I get this is a blessing. We get to come before the throne and get to say, God, you've given me a special place to come to your throne and to pray for other people. And I want to honor that and to have that desperation. So I have to work at it. I mean, if I get busy and somebody texts me, if I'm not careful, I'll just, okay, and text back, I just prayed for you. But to really try to make sure that I give that the urgency that I know they feel in that moment.
Yeah, I think there's something to say about taking time. I think that's the harder thing as pastors is on the outside, everybody sees, obviously they're like, oh, it's like your job is Sunday mornings. And it's like, well, no, there's a whole week's worth of stuff that goes into that. And I think sometimes we neglect how often the job really is just people. There's administrative stuff that happens. There's planning that has to happen. There's sermon writing and bumper making and all kinds of stuff. But taking the time for people is really what matters, and I take an example of that last week. Tristan, I know you're going to hear this. I love Tristan. He came up to the church last Thursday. Sean wasn't here, and he normally helps us make our slides for Sunday mornings. Sean wasn't there, and so Tristan instead took the last hour and a half of work where we had been helping with one of our church members all the rest of that day. So Adam and I had an hour and a half that day to get everything done we needed to get done. Tristan took up all hour and a half of that, asking me probably about, 30 questions. And leaving that moment, there's two ways I could look at it. I could be frustrated and go, you just took up all of my planning. You took up all my time to design things. You took up all my time to write on my sermon that I have for next week, or I could look at it as go, I'm his pastor. He has questions. He has things he is struggling with, things he wants to understand. I'm going to take time to help him. And I think the same thing's true, with our prayer. I think, we can look at it as something just to glance at and be like, all right, I prayed for you. Congratulations. I sent you your text, but when we take that level and really pray the way that we're supposed to with a passion and intensity and a love for the people that we're called to pastor, I think that changes the game.
I think Jesus set the example of what it looks like to be interrupted. And I said that on Sunday, but my favorite Jesus stories in the Bible are when he's interrupted by a question that's off topic, or he's interrupted by, a cot being lowered down from the roof.
Or the associate pastor.
Yeah, there's somebody on a trapeze. That's actually not biblical. And it's a little scary too, by the way. But
some Revelations imagery there.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. That's, I don't know if that's the bowls or the trumpets, but it's something. Maybe it's the seals.
It's the great beast.
But I think we need to view those things the same way, that people are the mission, and I have to work at that because I am a very get her done kind of leader, where I have a mission, and don't interrupt the mission with your problems. Don't interrupt the mission with people. Get the mission accomplished. And we have to remember that people are the mission. And Jesus took the time when, kids came running up and the disciples were like, no, Jesus is really busy. He's not got time for you. And Jesus is like, no. This is the mission. And I think we need to be aware of the same thing. And I think that comes to prayer. When people want us to pray for them, that is an urgent and important matter for them, and it needs to be an urgent and important matter for us as well.
Well, it's something you set the example for me. I came from churches where usually it was like, hey, will you pray for me? It's like, yes, I will. I'll get to that. I promise you, and you were really one of the first people that I watched when somebody goes, will you pray for me? Like, yes, I will. Right now. Stop what you're doing and we're going to pray. And I think that in and of itself, I think is a game changer, because it does show the level of priority and passion you have for it. And so I would say that's something I would encourage people to do in those moments. If you want to know how to pray with desperation and pray in those ways, make the time for it in the moment. And I think what I've experienced in that is, I think the level of, I'm a heart leader, that. And so my empathy is always there. But it does deepen that empathy when somebody asks me to pray for, someone that's got cancer, or they're walking through something serious in their life. In that moment, when I stop and pray in that moment, that there is a level of connection I have with them there that's way different than me waiting till I have a little more free time in an hour and a half. And I think, I don't know, I think it changes the way we pray in the moment.
No, I think that's important. And I think about how often Jesus used touch to heal, and that connection to another person. We know he didn't have to touch people to heal, but because he healed, a man's servant from a distance. But when he would heal a leper, typically he would reach out and touch the leper, and that is that connection that I think is different. And maybe this is a little off topic, but I think for Christians, prayer should never be a platitude or a condolence word. Yeah. In other words, I see that on social media, and it irritates me. It's a personal pet peeve when I see, Christians say prayers for you or things, and they mean well by that. But prayer is a powerful tool. It's not a sentiment. And so if you will notice, I say I never do it. I don't think I ever do it. I will typically say, I just prayed for you. And that's because I did. If somebody says, prayer, I need this prayer request, I say, I just prayed for you. Or sometimes I'll say, I just prayed for you, and I will keep praying. And I mean that. But I just think prayer becomes almost a non-Christian kind of sentiment. Prayers for your family. So blessings for you, blessings to you, my children. It's just this,
vibes.
Right, all the best. And those things are good, and they're good to say. But that is not what prayer is. And we never need to forget that as Christians. Prayer is a powerful tool given to us by God to change things and to align our will with his.
Yeah.
All right. So if someone says that they're afraid to pray this dangerous prayer of heal me, what would you tell them?
Wow. I don't know. What would I tell them? Well, I mean, I guess I'd ask why. Why are you afraid? What's holding you back? Because fear is the ultimate stealer of our joy and our hope. So why are you afraid? Is it fear? Do you feel like it's all lost? And sometimes I feel like people tell you something and then they get blown off. Like, I'm having this problem, and it's like, oh yeah, okay, gotcha. Sometimes it's about having someone, I think, for them acknowledge whatever their pain is, whether it's a physical pain or it's an emotional pain or a spiritual pain, whatever it is, but validating that pain is real. But then how do we go about reframing what healing looks like in your mind from that pain? And I think it is about changing the aspect of what they think healing is, and to help them take it further than just that whole doing something for me, to take this away. Because I've been there, take this away. That's what I truly meant for healing at that point. And it wasn't until everything began to change for us in our marriage and in our relationship that I was able to go back and go, this is better. No, is it still stink to be sick? Sure it does. That'd be a big old lie if I said it didn't. But the things that have changed, I would have never changed without something like that. So is it worth it? Yes. And I think it's just about reframing healing for people and helping them to understand that healing goes beyond the physical. What else? I mean, for us, it was marriage, it was family, it was planting a church, it was coming back to God, it was, being able to do kingdom work, all things that were not happening prior to that. But I think both things have to happen, because I think people get blown off a lot. And I'm sure I've been guilty of doing that to someone as well, but I think it's just acknowledging, yes, this isn't a great situation you're in, but how can we frame that where you can look at it from a different perspective of what does that look like in submission to God's will in that whole process?
And I think it's okay to hurt for a while, in the sense of being, God, just heal me. Heal me. When you first get a diagnosis of some terrible disease, I don't care how faithful a Christian you are, I think there is going to be some period of time where you are very self-focused, and God, just fix this, get me out of this. And that is okay. But I think the tough reality is God is no more likely to physically heal you because you refuse to start aligning with his will than he is if you align with his will. Yeah. I don't think it's any more or less likely that God will heal Lil of Lord Lupus because she doesn't pray every day for specific, fix this physical problem, because ultimately God is God and he is going to do what he does. So what I think you have to begin to prepare yourself for is that alignment and acceptance of his will. Because if he heals you, even if you are just praying, God, physically heal me, that's all I want. I refuse to be dangerous in this prayer. I want it now. I want it, fix me. And he does that, great. You have one that is a good day. Things are good. It would also be the same if you pray, God, your will be done. This is what I want, but you're God and I'm not. You're still going to be thrilled that you got physical healing. Yeah.
Right.
But on the other side of that is, if you pray solely for that selfish physical heal me and you don't get it, you're going to be angry with God. You're going to have bitterness. You're going to question potentially even your faith. Why would God allow this to happen? But when you begin to transition your will through prayer to God's will, in the event he chooses not to physically heal, you get to still see the beauty in what he's done, if that makes sense. And that I think if all we focused on was heal Lil physically, we would be so disappointed with God at this point after 16 years. But because we aligned our will with his, he did amazing things, bigger things than healing our lupus for us to have a joyful, happy life. But we would have missed that because he didn't answer the prayer that we were praying, which is physically heal. And so I think that it's as much for us, it is submission to God, and that is healthy respect for him being God, him being Lord of your life. But it's also important for you to begin to prepare yourself to see the beauty and the good in whatever God does, because it is beautiful and good because he is God, and that's the way he does things.
Yeah, I would say, you got to have the courage to let go of what you want, and trust that what God does is good no matter what it is. And I always think about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. I mean, think about that prayer. God, he knows what's about to happen. He's about to be crucified. And he goes, if this cup would pass, let it. But if not, your will be done.
And Jesus knows in that moment,
he knows
it's not going to happen.
It's not,
Right.
but
He
he's
is
still praying.
right. I think that's a beautiful example for us, because Jesus knew what was coming. I mean, he did not think there was a chance. That's what he came to do. He came to earth to do that. And I think that's a beautiful moment to us, because it is okay to pray that prayer, but understanding God's will is what God's will is.
Yeah. Well, and obviously out of that horrible death came the most beautiful gift ever given, and I think, again, that's an example that God takes these things that we think are so terrible and uses them to do such amazing things. And the same thing will be true for all of us. The more that we seek that and we seek God's will in those things, I think we'll be blown away by what God does with it.
Awesome. Man, this is great. Lil, you need to come on the podcast more. If you guys also agree with that, you should definitely send me different messages about how Lil makes the podcast even better, so that she can be convinced to be a normal part
She'll
of
be
it.
very thrilled that you loved her being on here.
Yes, she will.
And I'm going to be honest, she talked more than I thought she was going to.
You did.
Yeah.
You did.
Wow, okay.
Well, she talked more than me, which isn't saying much. All right. Well, that's our time for today. We hope you'll join us again next week for a special episode for the week of Thanksgiving. If you have any questions you'd like to see in the podcast, you can email those to me at adam@chariscity.com, and they might just make it in the mix. Thanks again for joining us for the Closer Look podcast.